stand up for me, please, sir? Can you raise your right hand? Do you swear from testimony before this jury the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Yeah, speak for me, please, sir. And can I get you to introduce yourself to the jury for me?
My name is Garlan Lott.
And can you spell your name for the court reporter?
It's Garlanlott.
Mr. Lott, in what town do you currently live?
Fitzgerald.
Did you grow up in Fitzgerald?
No.
Where'd you grow up?
In Asila.
How old are you?
34.
Do you know the defendant in this case, Bo Dukes?
I do.
How do you know Bo?
He was a year older than I was, so we hung out a lot on the weekends.
Now, you say he was a year younger than you?
Older.
Older. Did y'all go to the same high school?
Yes.
And what high school was that?
Irwin County High School.
What year did you graduate from high school?
2003.
So do you know what year Bo graduated from high school?
Would have been 2002.
Now, what about someone by the name of Ryan Duke? Do you know him?
Yes.
And how do you know Ryan?
The same way. I went to the same high school together. He was older than I was.
Ryan was also older than you?
Yes.
And do you know what year Ryan graduated high school?
Would have been 2002.
Now tell me, do you know what the nature of the relationship was between Bo and Ryan?
They were relatively good friends.
When you say relatively good friends, can you tell me, were they closer to each other than you were to the two of them?
Yes.
Would you say they were best friends?
Probably, yes.
Was it uncommon to see one without the other?
No.
It was not uncommon to see one without the other?
Yes.
Okay. When you were, I guess for lack of a better term, partying or hanging out, was it usually the two of them together?
Yes, they would be at the same social gathering.
Now, you've identified that you went to school with them and that y'all, I think you used the phrase hung out. Were y'all part of, I guess, the same social circle in Irwin County?
Yes.
And most of us being from a small town understand that circle's not real big, is that correct? Okay. Have you ever been to, when y'all were in high school, did you ever go to Ryan's home out there in Irwin County?
Yes.
And where did Ryan grow up?
Out at Pleasure Lake.
Okay. What about Bo, when y'all were growing up, did you ever go to Bo's home?
Yes.
And where did Bo live at the time?
He lived over close to the old high school in Irwin County, in Asila.
Did they ever come to your home for parties?
Yes.
Now, during the time period that y'all were in high school, I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. Can you tell me some of the people that were in your peer group that all hung out together?
There's a lot. Probably, let's see, Cliff Benson, Reese Jones, Clayton Sermons, Keith Harper, Ben Matt Mahan, Bo Dukes, Ryan Dukes. You want females too?
Please.
Jessica Day, Laura Bradford. Golly, I don't know. There's a bunch.
Okay.
I would need a yearbook.
That's fine. That gives me an idea. Where was, in high school, the main place that y'all would have parties or hang out on the weekends?
Probably my house.
Now I want to kind of move forward to after school. Tell me again, what year did you graduate high school?
2003.
And when you graduated from high school, did you initially go to any school or get any sort of degree?
I went to ABAC.
Okay. What kind of degree were you going towards at ABAC?
I really wasn't going for one at the time.
Okay. Did you ever, in fact, get a degree from ABAC?
No.
Did you wind up getting any sort of degree or certificate?
From ABAC?
No, from any school?
Yes.
Where did you get your degree or certificate?
I got a bachelor's degree in occupational health and safety from Columbia Southern University.
Okay. And what do you do now?
I'm an assistant production manager for Modern Dispersion South in Fitzgerald.
Does that involve the degree that you received?
No, that degree helped me get promoted into this position. I was the safety director there for 3 to 4 years.
Now, back in 2005, did you know someone by the name of Terra Grinstead?
Yes.
And how did you know Terra Grinstead?
She taught me twice in high school.
Do you know personally if either Bo Dukes or Ryan Duke ever had Terra as a teacher?
I do not.
Have you ever been to any party where Bo Dukes was present as well as Terra Grinstead?
No.
have you ever been to any party where Ryan Duke was present as well as Terra Grinstead?
No.
Now, understanding Ms. Grinstead was a fairly young teacher at the time, was it anything unusual that some of her male students might have a crush on her?
I'm pretty sure several of them thought she was very pretty and may have had a crush on her.
Do you recall any conversations or just in general whether or not Bo or Ryan ever discussed Ms. Grinstead?
No.
Nona, do you recall when Ms. Grinstead went missing?
Yes. It was 2 years after I graduated high school. So.
And how did you first learn that she was missing?
If I can best remember, I'd come back, I was working, and I'd come back home, and that's when I'd heard that she was, nobody had seen her, that she was missing.
Do you know how long it was after she went missing that you learned about it?
I'm sure it was probably the same day or day after everybody else in Asila heard about it.
That kind of leads me to my next question. At that point, would everyone in Asila have known that Terra Grinstead was missing?
Probably.
Have you ever had an occasion to hear either Ryan or Bo Dukes discuss the disappearance of Terra Grinstead?
Yes, there was a comment made at a party that I attended to.
Okay. Now, this party that you went to, how long after she went missing did this party occur?
2 to 3 weeks.
And where was this party held?
At the pecan orchard, at which they said in Fitzgerald. So,
do you know who owns that pecan orchard?
To my best knowledge, Randy Hudson owns it.
Had you ever been to that pecan orchard before?
No.
No?
No. Not that I can recall.
That's fine. So as far as the party at this pecan orchard, were y'all all just sort of standing in the field, on trucks? What was going on?
There was parked vehicles around, there was a fire, and we were standing around.
Okay. Was there drinking at the party?
I'm pretty sure there was.
Okay. And to be clear, do you believe you were probably drinking at that party?
More than likely.
Do you know whether or not you had partaken in any other substances that might have impaired your knowledge at that party?
More than likely.
Okay. Again, understanding we're talking about some time ago, any idea of anything else you might have taken at the time that might have affected your thought process at the time?
No.
Now, you said that you heard a comment made. I kind of want to set the scene and make sure I'm clear. Do you recall sitting here today where Bo and Ryan were at the time this comment got made?
I'm not exactly sure, but best of my knowledge, I believe they were sitting in a vehicle.
Okay. Whose vehicle would that have been?
I'm not sure.
Where were you?
Standing outside of the vehicle.
And was anything specific going on that brought up Terra Grinstead that you can recall?
No, I think it was just still pretty fresh, and most of the people there she probably taught, so we were still, just discussing.
Are you able at this point to distinguish between what Ryan said and what they said?
No.
The comments that were made, were they being made by just one person or by both of them?
The statement was made by one.
Okay. Do you recall who made that statement?
I do not.
The other person who was sitting there, do you recall if they had any response to that statement being made?
It was an agreed upon statement. The other one just kind of chuckled in agreement.
So to be clear, the statement gets made, the other person doesn't say, what are you talking about, or anything of that nature?
No.
What was the statement that was made?
The statement that I recall was, we killed and burned her body, basically.
Okay. At the time that they said that they killed and burned her body, did you have any idea where they meant this had occurred? Where the murder occurred and where the body burning occurred?
No.
Did you make an assumption about where you thought the body might have been burned?
I didn't make an assumption. I wasn't real sure.
Okay.
I just knew where I was at when the statement was made.
Do you know of anybody else that would have been an earshot of that statement being made when it was made?
I do not. I can't even recall who was all at that social gathering at that time.
Any doubt in your mind, however, that you heard these two people laughing about killing and burning Terra Grinstead's body?
No.
After you heard this statement just a few weeks after she had been murdered, did you tell anyone about what you had heard?
I went back and I told my roommate what I'd heard.
What was your roommate's name?
Luke Roberts.
Now, Luke Roberts, where does he work now?
He worked for the Asila Star. He's the editor.
At the time, was Luke Roberts working for the Asila Star?
He was not.
Did you tell him this in his capacity as a reporter?
I told him as a friend, because we were basically like best friends.
And did Luke Roberts encourage you to go to the authorities?
Yes, we discussed it, and he felt that I needed to, tell somebody.
Okay. So to be clear, has Luke Roberts ever told you to keep this quiet or not tell
Luke
anyone?
Roberts says he's never told me to keep this quiet.
Who did you tell after you told Luke Roberts?
So I told Andy and Janice Polk. I was currently working for them at the time as a photographer. And we basically went around and took photographs at Little League World Series, action photos of players.
Janice and Andy Polk, did they live in Asila at the time as well?
Yes.
Why would you have gone to them to tell them about this comment?
Well, I went to work the next day to filter through some photos, I believe, and I told them I trusted them.
Why didn't you just go to law enforcement?
Well, I didn't have the best reputation in Asila, so I didn't go to law enforcement.
Janice and Andy Polk, do you know if they had any affiliation with any searches or any websites that were being run to try and find Terra?
I believe they were assisting in development of websites to, get the word out about Terra and parties that were helping.
When you told Janice and Andy what you'd been told at this party, did they encourage you to go to law enforcement?
They took a I don't recall them encouraging me to go to law enforcement. They took a statement, if I best remember. Janice either handwritten or typed out a statement, and then in which they turned over to law enforcement.
Okay. Did you ever speak directly with law enforcement after Janice and Andy had you either type or write out the statement?
I was never interviewed by law enforcement.
You were never interviewed by law enforcement?
No.
Did you ever go out to that location in the pecan orchard where the bonfire had been when you were told this?
Yes.
And with whom did you go?
So I went out there with, to the best of my knowledge, was Janice and Andy and Nelson went out there. And I can't recall anybody else, but, so I really don't know.
When you say Nelson, who do you mean?
Polk.
Okay.
He was a sheriff. He was a sheriff deputy.
So someone from the
Law enforcement.
Law enforcement went with you?
Yes.
Now, when y'all went out there, did you have any reason to believe she had actually been burned in the orchard?
I didn't have any reason to believe it, no.
Okay.
I wasn't sure. I could have just, I wasn't sure.
When y'all go out to the orchard, you and Janice Polk and Andy Polk and Nelson Polk, tell us kind of how that happens.
So we just go out there and we just kind of just looked around the area where the fire was in the location where we was at that party.
Okay, to be clear, when you say the fire...
There was a bonfire there that night.
Okay. So you don't mean the fire where she was burned, you mean where your bonfire was?
Where the bonfire was that we were gathering, yes. And from best of my knowledge, it was in a completely different location.
Now that information that you've just told us, is that something you've learned
That's something I've learned since the arrest of Rondu.
Okay. But at the time, back in 2005, you didn't have any of that knowledge?
No.
After you've written or typed or signed a statement, I understand it's been a long time ago, but after the statement is done, and you go out to the orchard with someone from law enforcement, when was the next time you were contacted by law enforcement about this case?
I was contacted by Jason Chanel the day they arrested Rondu.
Okay. From 2005 until 2017, did you ever speak with another officer or anybody else from law enforcement about what you heard Bo and Ryan say that night?
Never.
Did anyone ever approach you in that time period?
Never.
Were you Why didn't you come forward and try and tell somebody again after that day?
I just assumed that I took the best steps at the time, and it was just a statement possibly made by some drunk young people, and it just wasn't really anything. Turned out to be nothing.
And I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying, and tell me if this is not right, but it sounds like you're saying you assumed it was handled by
I assumed it was handled by law enforcement, yes.
Okay. When Jason Shadell came and spoke with you the day Ryan Duke was arrested, did you cooperate with him?
Yes.
Did you give him a statement?
Yes.
Since that time...
I never physically met with him, though. It was all telephone conversation.
Thank you for clarifying that. I apologize. But you did speak with him and gave him an interview?
Yes.
Have you cooperated with both law enforcement and the district attorney's office in any way you've been asked to cooperate?
Best of my knowledge.
The location of where that pecan orchard was that you were having the bonfire, are you fairly familiar with that area of Bowens Mill Highway?
Yes.
Showing opposing counsel has been previously tendered and admitted to evidence of page 26 and 27.
You may.
Mr. Lott, I'm going to show you what's been previously tendered as states 26 and 27 and ask you to take a look at both of those for me and tell me if you're able to identify on either of those the general area of where that bonfire occurred. And tell me which one's best for you.
I believe this one's going to be the best.
So that's going to be states 26. Judge, may I have the witness step down for me?
You can.
Let me just step on down here in front of the jury,
You gotta
please.
make sure that the court reporter can pick up what you're saying.
So I know I'll talk loud enough. If you'll be sure and talk loud enough, we won't get in trouble, okay?
All right.
So I'm going to show you stage 26. Is that oriented correctly, or how do you want me to orient it?
Let's see. Probably about that.
Okay. So this road that we see running in the middle of stage 26, do you know the name of that road?
That is Bowens Mill Highway.
Okay. And can you show us on Bowens Mill, on this stage 26, where the pecan orchard is?
The pecan orchard is going to be all this area here.
Okay. Where was the bonfire, the general location of the bonfire y'all had that night?
Here.
So way down here on the south end?
Yes.
That's all the questions I have. You can have a seat, please, sir. After this comment was made in 2005, did you continue to be friends with Bo and Ryan?
I did hang out with them probably a couple more times. Maybe a handful, but not very much. I'd kind of started taking a different direction in my life, I guess you would say.
When you say a different direction, can you tell us what you mean by that?
I'd got a job over in Douglas, and I'd started school at South Georgia College, so all my friends in Irwin County, I was spending more time in Douglas in that area, so.
As you're sitting here tonight, are you able to tell this jury, today, are you able to tell this jury specifically who all was at the bonfire where Ryan and Bo made that statement?
I'm not.
Do you know or have any knowledge of being present at the home of Bo and Ryan the night that Terra Grinstead was murdered?
I was not.
Other than what you heard Bo and Ryan say and quite frankly joke about that day, do you have any other personal knowledge about how Terra Grinstead was murdered?
I do not.
And the person that we've been discussing, Bo Dukes, who was one of the two people joking around about that, is he in the courtroom today?
Yes.
And could you please identify him for the jury?
He's here.
So let the record reflect, please, Judge, he's identified the defendant. I don't have any other questions, Mr. Lott.
All right. Mr. Fox.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Lott.
How are you?
Doing well, thank you. I've got some questions. If I ask you anything that you do not hear, you do not understand, let me know.
Okay.
Efforts not to try to trick you, but more to it's important you understand what's being asked before you answer. When did you first meet Bodily?
The first time I met Bo Dukes was, I believe, around my freshman year in high school, maybe?
Yeah. All right, so he would have been a sophomore at that time?
Correct.
And I believe you said you graduated 2003.
Correct.
And by about 2005, 2006, you were in Douglas, focusing on your job, focusing on school.
Yeah, around that time.
But y'all,
2006, probably more.
2006?
Yeah.
Okay. But during that time, though you may not have been best friends, you were close friends.
We were acquaintances.
Spent time together socially?
Yes.
Saw each other at parties?
Yes.
Drank together on occasion?
Yes.
Now, you had said the statement that was made, the three of you were in a car that day.
I wasn't in the vehicle.
You were outside of the vehicle?
Yes.
So you truly then overheard the statement. It was not made to you. Well, in fairness, let me ask you.
I don't know if it was made towards me or if I did overhear the statement.
Okay. All right. It isn't a situation where they said, hey, Garlan,
No.
this is what happened.
No. It wasn't a confession towards me.
Thank you. And your testimony was that someone, didn't know who, had made the comment that she'd been killed and burned. Someone chuckled about it. Was that the end of it? The end of what you heard?
Yes.
Not something where people were laughing about this, going on, joking about it. It was a comment by someone unknown, chuckled by someone unknown. That was it.
Yes.
But it's pointed out that...
But I do believe and agree and know that it was an agreed upon statement by him, both Ryan and Bo.
And you say that in the sense that when the person said we burned to kill her, the other person said nothing to negate that fact.
Correct.
Suggested it. Okay. Thank you. His district attorney had stated to you, he said, at that point in time, everybody in Asila is looking for Miss Grinstead, correct?
Correct.
And when you heard this statement, it bothered you, correct?
Correct.
It bothered you and you took it seriously, correct?
Correct.
And you went to people you trusted because you believed that based on prior actions or whatever perception may be, you may not have had the best reputation with law enforcement.
Correct.
But you still went to someone you trusted and you did so, I believe you said, the next day.
Yeah, I believe it was the next day.
All right. And the statement that was prepared, did you write that yourself or did Janice Polk write it?
Janice Polk.
When she wrote that statement, were they your words being written down by her or were they her words?
Best of my knowledge, they were my words.
And I know we're going way back, 14 plus years, okay? But to the best of your recollection, do you remember signing off on that in any way, initialing it or something?
Best of my recollection, I did. But I can't 100% be sure.
I understand, again, we're talking about 14 years.
Yeah.
That statement is then provided to law enforcement.
Correct. Best of my knowledge.
And was that the Irwin County Sheriff's Office?
Correct.
And you believe that because eventually you end up with not only Andrew Dennis, but Nelson Hawk, who you said is with the deputy with the Sheriff's Office, and y'all walk around the field and look where they're going to bonfire.
Correct.
Now, I know you said you had never been sat down and interviewed. Is that right?
Correct.
Much like what happened when you talked with Agent Shadell. He called you and asked you very, very specific questions, and you walked directly to the happening. But when you were out in that field that day, did you talk with Nelson Hall, deputy, about the statement you had overheard?
I don't recall discussing it.
It could have happened, it may not have happened, you just don't recall one way or the other.
Yeah, I don't recall discussing it with him.
He seemed to be taking the matter seriously.
To the best of my judgment at the time, I guess, yes, maybe. Possibly, to the best of my knowledge.
Was looking for Mr. Grinstead.
Yeah.
Was the letter given to Nelson?
I didn't give it to him myself, so
Are Andy and Janice related to Nelson?
not that I'm aware of.
Just coincidental both last name.
Yeah, but I don't believe or never recall them making a statement that they were related to him.
But in summary, the day after you heard this statement that so disturbed you prepared a statement with the assistance of Janice Paul, the contents of which stated you had heard and had information that both Brian Dew and Bo Dews may have something to do with the death or disappearance of Miss Terra Grinstead.
Yes,
And that was given to law enforcement.
best of my knowledge.
There was a search, and you believe this taken seriously, but you never heard anything after.
Correct.
Or do you remember when Bo enlisted and went to the Army?
Not really.
Okay. Were you back in town? I know you were at Douglas working in 2006 in your school. Did you happen to spend Christmas back in this area?
I'm sure I went to a relative's house, but I don't recall getting up with any buddies or old friends or anything like that.
Okay. You don't remember ever being at any parties or any places where Mr. Dukes would have been, if anybody who may have been in the Army would have been that?
No.
You said earlier that you had drank alcohol before Mr. Dukes. Have you ever personally observed him to get so intoxicated that he would not remember what may have happened in Harder Hole the night before?
I can't recall any instance of him being in that manner.
Okay.
So, but I'm pretty sure all of us at that age group at one time or another drank enough where we didn't remember.
That have happened to you?
Yes.
Thanks, sir.
I have a couple things. Defense counsel referenced the fact that there were two unknown persons making statements. I think you clarified, but I want to be sure. Who were the two people who were making this agreement or this discussion about murdering and burning Terra Grinstead's body?
It was both Bo and Ryan Dukes.
Did either one of them seem to be taking more responsibility than the other?
Not that I can recall.
Either of them seem in any way disturbed by what would happen?
Not at the time.
Now, defense counsel asked you about if you'd ever been so intoxicated you didn't remember what happened the night before. To your recollection, have you ever been so intoxicated you claim to have murdered someone?
I've never been that intoxicated before.
To your recollection, do you ever remember being so intoxicated that you claim to have burned someone's body?
Never.
Did you find the statement funny?
I didn't find it funny.
Let me ask you, there have been, let me go back. Well, you've talked about it a little bit, the nature of the relationship between Bo and Ryan on that night when they were joking around about this. Either of them seemed scared of the other person.
Never.
Either of them seemed to be covering up for the other person.
No.
Either of them seemed to think that this was an inappropriate comment to make.
Not at the time.
What, in fact, was their reaction?
Like I said, one said it and the other chuckled in agreement.
No further questions.
Spot.
No recross, Your Honor.
All right, you can step down.
Thank you.
You can leave that there. You're free to go, sir. State will call Gary Rothwell to the stand. Would you raise your right hand for me, please, sir? Do you swear affirm the testimony before this jury with the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, have a seat, please. let me get you to introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Gary Rothwell.
Now, how are you currently employed, Mr. Rothwell?
Could you have him spell that?
I apologize. Can you spell your name, Mr. Rothwell?
Rothwell, and Gary is Gary.
Thank you, Judge. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
How are you currently employed?
I'm retired from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and have a consulting business. Basically, I teach graduate school, I teach police, I do some program assessments of law enforcement agencies, and I have a private detective license and do interviews for attorneys in civil cases.
How long have you been retired from GBI?
I'll be 7 years in July of this year.
Prior to your retirement, how long did you work with the GBI?
Approximately 31 years rounded up.
When you were working with GBI, what was the last position that you held?
I was special agent in charge of the GBI Region 13 office in Perry, Georgia.
When you say special agent in charge, tell the jury what that means.
That means I was the operational commander or the actual commander of that regional office that covered 10 counties in Georgia.
Now, one of the counties that was covered by the Perry office, was that Irwin County?
That's correct.
What about Ben Hill County?
Yes.
Were you working in the Perry office in 2005 when Terra Grinstead first went missing?
I was.
And what was your position with the GBI at that time?
I was the special agent in charge of the GBI Region 13 office there in Perry.
As the special agent in charge, does that mean that you have other people who you supervise?
That's correct. We have several agents assigned to each regional office, and I oversee them and assist them in their investigations.
Do those agents come to the Perry office and stay at the Perry office, or do they move in and out?
Like any organization, people come and go. They either transfer, move around, get promoted, or some leave the agency.
Now, in 2005, when Terra was first reported missing, who was the agent who was assigned to Irwin County?
That was Dominic Turner.
Based on the fact that he was assigned to Irwin County and that she was reported missing from Irwin County, was he the lead agent at the time?
That's correct. He was what we call the case agent, which is typically the agent with responsibility for a county in which a crime occurs.
However, was he the only agent who was working the missing persons case of Terra Grinstead?
He was not.
And I keep referring to it as a missing persons case, so let me kind of clarify that. Was this case anything other than a missing persons case during your tenure with the GBI?
No, this case was classified as a 25 case in our numerical terminology, which means an other type of investigation which covers missing persons, and this case was always considered a missing person as long as I was working on it.
Why was it not considered a murder case?
Because we did not know what had happened to Terra Grinstead. We did not know where she was.
Why was it not considered a kidnapping case?
Because we did not have evidence to presume that there was a kidnapping or to conclude that one had occurred.
Was that a possibility? Were those things possibilities of what may have occurred?
Yes.
What were other possibilities?
Murder was a possibility. Her leaving on her own was a possibility. As we said, a kidnapping in which she was still alive somewhere was a possibility.
I kind of want to go back and set the stage a little bit. There may be some jurors who are too young to remember this, and then others of us have just forgotten. But in 2005, were there any other missing persons cases that gained sort of national attention or even international attention?
Terra's case occurred right after the Natalie Holloway missing persons case in Aruba, which was one of the first of the major investigations that are received much media coverage.
Okay. Were there any missing persons cases during that time period where it turned out the person had left on their own accord?
That there was one of much significance in Atlanta.
Okay. And was there a sort of nickname for what the media called that person?
Yes, this case was called the Runaway Bride.
And the Runaway Bride, was that before Terra went missing or after, or do you recall?
That was before Terra went missing.
Those cases that you've discussed, the Natalie Holloway case and it's actually Jennifer Wilbanks, but the Runaway Bride case, did those affect the nature of this investigation?
The Runaway Bride case probably made it more likely that we needed to consider Terra had left on her own. In that particular case, this was a bride that was scheduled to be married and disappeared, and there was an investigation and much media publicity in which the bridegroom, jilted bridegroom, so to speak, was believed to be the person responsible, and he suffered a lot of basically slander and libel on account of that, and it turned out she had run away and was found in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay. Again, though, did those affect how this case was investigated?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay. So let me ask a little differently. Did the actual fact that those had occurred affect the way you investigated the case, or was there something about the nature of this case that affected this investigation?
Well, we treated this case as an independent investigation. We addressed it the way that we normally would. Those cases probably were some of the earliest ones of the immense media coverage, which was something we weren't accustomed, and that's something that happened in our case that we were not expecting.
Okay. So you refer to it as immense media coverage. Did that immense media coverage change not necessarily what you did as an investigator, but how the investigation went itself?
Yes, it changed the scope of the investigation. We wound up with an exponential amount of information coming in that we had to handle and address, and leads coming in that we weren't accustomed to doing that.
Okay. Now you mentioned earlier that this media attention was more than what you expected. Does the amount of media coverage a case get complicate the investigation of the case?
Yes.
Explain that to the jury, please.
Well, when a case, we consider it going national. When a case goes national, you become the people from all over provide information, and much of it is extraneous information. However, you have to address every lead, or try to at least address every lead after you prioritize them. And it's a tremendous strain on resources, both in handling the investigation itself and in sorting out the information as to what's important and what's not, what's handled and what is not handled, and that sort of thing.
Now, in this case in particular, in Terra's case, were there any persons not from Asila and not with law enforcement who were essentially inserting themselves into this case?
Yes, and that's another aspect. When a case gets this kind of publicity, you have a lot of self-deployment by law enforcement agencies. You have people that are volunteering. You have civilian participation, and it becomes an entity into itself. And as an investigator, we're used to coordinating an investigation and working it ourselves. And what happened in this case, if I may go on, is we had a proliferation of tip lines and message boards and sources that were publicized for people to provide leads to, and that information was not necessarily coming to us in a coherent manner.
Now, to be clear, are you saying that all media attention on investigation is a bad thing?
No, it's not.
In this situation, however, due to the fact that, as you just mentioned, there was some, I don't think you used this word, but there was some confusion about who was getting that information, did that create complications? Certainly,
because the information is not coordinated. In an ideal investigation, you have a focal point for leads to arrive, that the public has a phone number for a law enforcement agency that's responsible, and the information is coming in and funneled and evaluated by people that are involved in the investigation. In this instance, we had a Terra center, we had tip lines, websites, what have you, where information was coming in to people that were not involved in the investigation.
Such as? Who were the people it was coming to?
Well, it was coming to, I'm not sure, there were a lot of people that were getting that information.
Okay, and let me kind of ask it a little differently. Did you ever learn as to whether or not someone from non-law enforcement person was receiving the information from the command center where you were searching for Terra?
Well, an example, and there was so much of this that went on, that's why I wasn't clear on the question. But we had one well-established tip line with which we were not aware early on, and that tip line was actually going to a Southern Link radio telephone that was on the hip of a recovery agent who was seeking a $200,000 reward that had been publicized also. That was the type of thing that we were dealing with, if that's
Yes.
where you...
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just, if that's the question.
That particular recovery agent, was he forwarding all of the information and tips to you?
No, he was not.
Was he trying to help law enforcement find Terra, or was he trying to get a reward?
It's my opinion he was pursuing the award, and we eventually he was told to cease and desist by the private detective board.
Now, were there any other persons of note who inserted themselves into this investigation over the years that complicated the investigation?
Dr. Maurice Godwin.
Now, you've referred to him as Dr. Maurice Godwin. Have you ever met this person?
Met him once.
And have you had an occasion to, in some way, investigate his credentials?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, without referring to my report that I wrote at the time, we did an inquiry. We contacted people involved. He claims to be a profiler, so we contacted people that were professional profilers. Kim Ross-Moe is one that comes to mind, that said that Dr. Godwin had never been accepted into that community of profilers, and that he attached himself to families and interjected himself into high-profile cases and created problems for law enforcement. So I was aware of that. I looked into his background as a police officer in North Carolina and learned that, you know, he had not really had any investigative experience, and may have had a small amount of drug experience and experience as a radio operator or some capacity like that, but did not have a significant background in criminal investigations from what I could determine.
Now, again, you've referred to him as Dr. Godwin. Do you know the nature of his PhD or doctorate?
He has a PhD in some criminology or some other similar discipline from the University of Liverpool in England.
Now, I've not referred to you as Dr. Rothwell, but do you also have a doctorate?
I do.
What's your doctorate?
I have a doctorate in public administration from the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa.
Do you typically go by Dr. Rothwell?
Only to my students at Columbus State University.
Those things that we've discussed, and obviously we just have to touching on a few of those, but did those add to the work the GBI had to do in this case in 2005?
Yes, if all of that contributed. Are you talking about anybody, Dr. Godwin specifically, or anybody else?
The people inserting themselves in.
Yes, because people had differing motives as to what they were trying to achieve. For instance, we already mentioned the recovery agent seeking the reward money, and I'm sure there are plenty of people that were pursuing that. We had people that were seeking publicity for themselves, such as Dr. Godwin, and what we wound up doing in regard to him was we wound up chasing leads that he would put in the news first, and then we would have to follow behind it because we had an obligation to follow up on those leads because they were out in public.
What about, have any psychics calling?
Oh yes, we had a tremendous number of psychics.
Were there ever occasions where you were running a lead that Dr. Godwin gave you that you later found out in fact came from a psychic?
I have to refer to the file.
Were there ever times that you wound up having to deal with some of the leads that came from these psychics?
Yes.
Did any of that pan out?
The psychic leads did not pan out, no.
Did anything Dr. Godwin gave you pan out?
No, it did not.
But again, were you obligated to follow through?
Yes, we were obligated to follow through because these were leads that we had received, and not only have we received them, we have to prioritize them and try to address them within the within the resources that we have. But in this instance, once a lead was made public, we had to kind of get in front of it to make sure that we addressed it for sure.
Now, in 2005, when Terra first went missing, do you know how many agents were working in the Perry office? I'm going to ask you to do math, Dr. Rothwell.
Approximately 8 sworn agents, I believe, possibly 9.
Would that include yourself?
That would include myself.
Would that include your assistant special agent in charge?
That's correct.
In 2005, when Terra Grinstead went missing, was that the only case that the Perry office was working at the time?
No.
Due to the nature of this case and the amount of agents that you had, did you have to at times request assistance from either other GBI offices or from the local departments?
Yes.
And were you also getting tips and leads that would come in through the other local departments?
Yes.
Now, we've talked earlier about the fact that Dominic Turner was the agent in 2005 when this happened. During your tenure with the GBI, did he remain the agent the entire time?
No.
When did Dominic Turner leave the GBI?
He left the GBI in, I believe, the first week of October 2007.
After Dominic Turner left the GBI, who became the lead agent?
Leah Lightner.
And Leah Lightner, is she with the GBI?
She is not.
And how long was she the lead agent on the case?
Until some point in 2009, perhaps April or so. I'm not sure on the exact month.
When Leah left the GBI, who became the lead agent on this case?
Jason Shadell.
And Jason Shadell, to your knowledge, was he still the lead agent at the time that Ryan and Bo Duke were arrested in this case?
He was.
And I said that wrong, Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes. This agent Shadell, however, worked for you when you were still the SAC there?
Yes, he did.
And are you the one who assigned him as the lead agent on the case?
I did.
Despite the fact that you were never the lead agent, as a supervisor, was it your job to essentially know what your agents were doing?
Yes, it was.
And in this particular case, would it be fair to say that there was a lot or more man hours than any other case in the state of Georgia?
Yes, at the time I retired, I believe it was the largest case file in GBI history, and it was dozens of GBI agents participated and countless others from other agencies.
At the time you retired from the GBI, were you any closer to arresting somebody on Terra's disappearance?
Any closer?
Than you had been on October 22nd, 2005?
I knew we had significant evidence, but as far as tying that evidence to a specific person, we were no closer when I left than we were when we started.
And that kind of leads me to my next point. Are there things that you knew back in 2005 that now that the arrest has been made makes sense in this case?
Absolutely.
And even though you are now retired, have you at least on some level been privy to the investigation involving Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes?
Yes.
Now, let me talk to you a little bit about some of that evidence. For instance, in 2005, did you receive any evidence related to Terra's phone records?
Yes.
And I don't want to go through everything, but the short version of what you learned from Terra's phone records, tell us about that.
The short version, from a contact standpoint or from a technical standpoint or both?
From a contact standpoint.
Well, she had two phones. She had a landline, which is what we call a typical house phone, a hardwired phone, and she had a cell phone. The landline was with Alltel, with Alltel, and her cell phone was also with Alltel. And we were able to establish the phone calls that she made before she disappeared, and those phone calls ceased at approximately 11 o'clock p.m. on October 22nd. I mean, there's a lot about the phone records I could say. I'm not sure exactly what.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I apologize. I was going to ask another question, but that's what I was getting at.
Okay.
When did her outgoing phone calls cease?
Yeah.
Can you tell me that again?
Approximately 11 o'clock p.m. on October 22nd, 2005, Saturday night.
Saturday. Now, were there any phone calls made to her residence on Sunday night or early Sunday morning that drew the attention of law enforcement back in 2005?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the jury what drew your attention to that?
Well, initially what drew our attention was a readout of the caller ID on Terra's home phone, her landline phone, which showed at approximately 9:26 a.m. on Sunday the 23rd, I believe it's 9:26. On Sunday, October 23rd, there was a call from North Coast Pay with a local number. So what we did was we subpoenaed the records for that local number and found it to be a payphone at the G&G Mart on Highway 129, a few blocks from Terra's house. And when we looked at the time in question that the North Coast Payphone had called Terra's residence, we saw something interesting. Basically, it was a Alltel directory assistance number, an 800 number, and directly below that at the same time was a 229-555-1212 reference, which was also directory assistance, which showed us that this payphone, someone had used the payphone and had called essentially 411 Connect to try to get Terra's telephone number and then telephone her residence.
Okay, so for my jurors who may have never lived without a cell phone, what do you mean when you say directory connect or 411 connect?
Before the advent of cell phones and everyone being able to just put a number in and a name pop up, if you didn't know someone's number, you would oftentimes, if you were either using your own landline phone or you were traveling or whatever and you went to a payphone, you could dial the area code. Well, first of all, if it was a local call, you could dial 411, and then it would give you the number after you named who you were trying to reach. It would give you the number, and then it would give you the option for that payphone to make the connection to the caller that you were trying to call. In other words, you are seeking a number, it would give you the number, then give you the option to actually make the connection of that call. And you could either do that by dialing 411, or oftentimes in an area code you would dial the area code 229, for instance, and then 555-1212. That was kind of like a universal 411 if you were looking for a particular area code.
Would the person making that phone call from the G&G store in Asila, Georgia, would they have had to have used 411 or directory assistance if they already knew Terra's phone number?
No, and that's what was so perplexing about the call.
Prior to 2017, when Ryan Duke was arrested and interviewed by law enforcement, did you have any knowledge as to who had made that 411 call?
No.
Did you have were you any closer to figuring out who had made that 411 call prior to interviewing Ryan Duke?
No.
Now, have you ever, let me say, prior to 2017, when the arrest was made, had you ever heard the name Ryan Duke or Bo Dukes?
That I recalled?
Yes, sir.
Not that I recalled.
Since these arrests have been made, has it come to your attention that the information related to Bo and Ryan was known by law enforcement prior to 2017?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me about that, please?
I have since learned and reviewed the file and found that there was a reference to Ryan and Bo in an other agency report in 2005 that was incorporated subsequently into the GBI file, and that in July and in October of 2008 we made reference to them in two investigative summaries that were essentially from almost identical sources where these names were mentioned. And that was in our own, I haven't explained how we have our own reports and we have other agents' reports and attachments, but initially they were named in what we call an attachment. It's a report written by another agency that's incorporated into our file. But then in 2008, we have an actual investigative summary. That's our own report written by an agent in which they are referenced in an interview with two other people.
Okay. Do you have any independent recollection of those reports in 2008?
My recollection now is that we thought that lead had been addressed by local law enforcement as unfounded and did not follow up.
Explain what you mean when you say your recollection now is that.
I've thought about it, I've talked to other agents involved, and I've kind of developed a recollection that that's what occurred.
On the day that Ryan Duke was arrested, did you recall that those actual reports existed?
No.
What about the attachment attachment that was received from the Irwin County Sheriff's Office, did you have any independent recollection of that on the day that Ryan Duke was arrested?
No.
Can you explain to this jury, and I know you've somewhat talked about it, but can you explain to this jury how it was that that was not caught in 2005 or 2008?
I probably need to explain the GBI case reporting procedures. Okay, and the GBI is an assisting agency. That means we are requested by local law enforcement to get involved in an investigation, and we don't take it over. We work it with them, and we work it with other law enforcement agencies that may be involved in that particular case. Our case files consist of our own reports, which are reports that where an agent goes out and conducts an investigative act and writes a summary. Typically, they'll dictate it. They may type it into the system, and then that report is put into the case file with attachments. Many times those attachments are property receipts. They might be consent waivers. They might be transcripts of interviews, or they might be what I've referred to earlier as other agency documents. That means reports that we obtain from another law enforcement agency. So in this instance, I believe that the initial reference to Bo and Ryan was in a report that came from what was known as the Terra Center, and that was the search center that when some things occurred, they created documentation that came to us sort of en masse, and it got incorporated into our file as information from the Terra Center. And that reference was missed, apparently.
Okay. What about 2008?
2008 was a summary written by Special Agent Lightner in which he was interviewing actually two people. They were married at the time, Andy and Janice Pauk, who were responsible for the Find Terra website and one of the tip lines. And so Leah was interviewing them in order to see if there was any information that they had received from the tip line that we might have missed. So these names were mentioned in a long, I think it's about a 12-page investigative summary, among other information that was divulged by them. And I can't remember the length of each summary, but they were married and the information was similar. But both of them had had a participation when the information had come into Irwin County law enforcement.
As you sit here today, though, is there any doubt that prior to February 2017, the names Bo Dukes and Ryan Duke were known to GBI?
I can't say they weren't known. They're in our own report. I know I'm certain I read that report, so I can't say that. Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize. I didn't interrupt you again.
No, I'm not sure. Hopefully I'm answering the question.
I'm going to kind of change direction a little bit and go back to the original 2005 investigation. Part of the investigation in this case over the years dealt with, or did it deal with a glove that was located at Terra's residence?
That's correct.
And did you ever personally observe this glove?
I did not observe it at the scene.
Okay. Did you observe it later?
I observed it later, I believe, at the crime lab.
Okay. And were you, I will say, intimately involved with the crime lab at that time, trying to see what sort of information could be obtained from this glove?
Yes. The glove had been found by Asila Police Detective Bill Bars initially before we ever arrived at Terra's residence. It was out of place. It didn't make sense. It wasn't anything that was dropped by a first responder or anything like that. So it had immediate significance to us. At that time, in 2005, DNA technology, fingerprint technology, it was almost unheard of, at least as far as we knew, for any kind of DNA or fingerprints to be recovered from the glove, but we wanted to give it the best possible attempt. So I contacted Larry Peterson, who's a well-known criminalist from the Atlanta child murders back in the 1970s and 80s, and he basically orchestrated a walkthrough with the different branches that would be involved in processing that glove so that they could devise a strategy to analyze it that would most likely result in something substantive if it was possible at all.
Prior to this case, do you recall ever having information about what we now refer to as touch DNA?
There was no thing to our knowledge as touch DNA in 2005 and 2006, and I don't believe touch DNA was available until recently.
2005 and 2005, when this case was occurring, what was your knowledge as a seasoned law enforcement agent as to how DNA could be recovered from items? What sort of bodily fluids could you use to recover it?
Well, blood, semen, and possible cellular transfer, hair, those were the known media for DNA to be obtained.
When you saw this glove, did it appear to have any blood on it?
To my knowledge, I didn't see any blood on it.
Matt Branch, Judge?
Whose phone is that? Turn that over to the deputy.
Matt Branch, Judge?
Yeah.
I've shown these to opposing counsel as well, have marked the states exhibits 28 and 29. I'm actually going to show you states 29 first and ask you if you recognize that.
Well, that looks like the glove in question.
Now, understanding did you take that picture?
No, I did not.
But is that consistent with the glove that you delivered to the GBI to be tested in this case?
Yes, it is.
Now, throughout the course of the investigation, did you learn what the crime lab did to actually attempt to get these different parts, fingerprints, palm prints, DNA from the glove?
Yes.
What did they do?
Essentially, they assessed the likelihood of which area of the glove would have DNA evidence and which area of the glove might have latent fingerprints or latent palm prints on it. And it's my understanding they cut the glove up in pieces, and so the DNA analysts had certain portions of the glove and the fingerprint analysts had other portions of the glove.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as states 28 and ask you, does that appear consistent with what your understanding is they did with this glove?
Yes, I don't know if I've seen this picture, but I've seen a similar image before.
You have seen a similar
I
image?
believe so. I believe so.
And that image, while you say you haven't seen that picture, the nature in which that glove is cut, is that consistent with the GBI file that you had on this case as to how the glove from Terra's yard was cut? That's
Consistent as to how I understood that they would cut it up to analyze it. I remember that they took the fingerprints and the palm part and separated them.
Okay.
Fingertips, excuse me.
Now, again, understanding you're not someone that worked for the crime lab, did you have to gain information from the crime lab in order to continue your investigation in this case?
Yes.
And part of that information that you obtained from the crime lab, did you learn whether or not there was any DNA obtained from the glove itself?
Yes.
And at the time, did you learn whether it was one person's DNA or two people's DNA or more?
Two people's DNA.
Were they able to identify any of the person's DNA that was on the glove?
Yes.
Who was that?
Terra Grinstead.
Were they able at the time to identify who the other person's DNA was?
No, they could just say it was male DNA.
Based on that information, did the GBI swab persons in this case to see if they could match it to the unknown sample from the glove?
Yes.
As of your retirement from the GBI, could you tell this jury, maybe not exactly, but can you tell us approximately how many people were swabbed in this case?
Approximately 200, I believe. I can check that, but I don't believe it was about 200.
At the time that you retired from the GBI, had there been any matches?
No.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you, Dr. Oliver.
All right, Mr. Fox, you may cross-examine the witness.
Good afternoon.
You can call me Mr. Rothwell. Agent Rothwell I kind of like, but I guess I don't do that anymore.
I'll be glad to call you Agent Rothwell. You retired about 7 years ago.
July, to be 7 years this July. July 31st.
So that'd be 2012.
2012, yes.
And state started out its examination, it mentioned 2 cases that could have impacted the Grinstead case. The first was Natalie Holloway, who went missing, I believe, before Ms. Grinstead did. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And that was a young lady who had been visiting Aruba on a trip and had gone allegedly missing after drinking with some local folks on the beach. Correct?
Something to that effect. I didn't follow it that closely.
Okay. And the missing bride case was a young lady who we now know got cold feet before wedding, but she just didn't come home from a jog.
Right. She disappeared.
She disappeared. However, neither of those cases had something that Ms. Grinstead's case had, which are scenes of a struggle in a bedroom and blood on a comforter.
The description of scenes of a struggle, I'm not sure I agree with that.
All right. There was a lamp that looked like it may have been overturned.
The scene in Terra's house was ambiguous to us. We did not know if a struggle had occurred there or not. We needed more information because we had a situation in which many people had been in the residence that day, and also several persons had been in the residence before law enforcement arrived after she was found to be missing. We also had conflicting testimony or conflicting statements about the lamp. We had people saying that the lamp was already broken and others saying that it wasn't. So we needed more information and to conclude that a struggle had occurred there.
No question there was blood on the comforter.
That was something that we never divulged. We don't know if it was blood or menstrual fluid, and that was one of the ambiguous aspects of that crime scene, was that there was blood on the comforter, but it also could have been menstrual fluid, and the crime lab could not discern one way or another. So knowing that there were children there and Terra being of age, we could not rule that out, but we kept it quiet because it was guilty knowledge. We presumed that if we ever had an offender, if we did not disclose that and the offender mentioned a struggle on the bed, then we would have evidence that that person was possibly responsible.
Much like the phone call that had been placed on the Payphone?
Correct. We did not disclose that.
But either way, the GBI's investigation of Ms. Grinstead's case was independent, not influenced by any other cases that had gone national before.
I believe the question about how it was influenced just meant to a mindset, 2 things. With the runaway bride, it gave credence to the possibility that this might be, gave more credence to the possibility that this might be a voluntary disappearance. Terra had some other issues in her life and had an incident a couple of weeks before, or 20 days before perhaps, that would support the possibility that something like that occurred. So the runaway bride was a situation where this actually happened. Someone had essentially just disappeared on their own, and it was recent. With regard to Natalie Holloway, it had to do with the publicity. It had to do with the nationalizing of a case and the exponential, as a term I used, increase in the amount of information with which you would have to deal. And that is what I understood the question about those 2 cases to mean. As far as how we investigated the case, we tried to investigate it like we do any other case. We just had a lot more information than we were used to dealing with.
Well, that makes the case difficult.
Correct.
Because, as you said, you had the GBI is there to assist local law enforcement, correct?
We're an assisting agency, but what happens many times is, we will be the lead agency once we're requested to assist. Some people will say we take it over. We never take it over. We call ourselves assisting, and we generally have more resources than a lot of the agencies that we participate with.
And in this case, you had leads and information from the public coming in directly to the GBI, potential leads coming into local law enforcement that would need to be funneled to the GBI, and then what I would call kind of all the civilian leads stated referenced as far as message boards and, tip lines and things of that nature.
That's correct.
Looking to the GBI only, what was the working operational plan for when the GBI would get leads by phone or by email concerning this Grinstead's case directly to the GBI?
Directly to the GBI, we had a tip line in Atlanta where we had operators that are staffed by GBI administration, and we had given them questions to ask, I believe, and had a kind of a Terra checklist for people that called in, and they were to refer that information to us. Typically, they would fax it or some uniform fashion. We also had the tip, you said strictly GBI, not Asila PD?
Yes.
Okay. And then internally in the office's phones are typically answered at that time by investigative assistants, and they had a protocol themselves to refer that information. And again, I believe we had a form that we were using to receive that information at least early on.
And I know you all get a lot of calls.
Yeah.
But were the instructions to the agents and the other people working for GBI attending to these meetings that they would follow up on those leads, that they just wouldn't be ignored?
That's the intention.
Were there records generated that came in based on the forms that you just described?
If they use the form. The regional office, maybe I'm understanding your question now. The regional office is staffed by, I believe at that time, 8 or 9 agents and 2 support personnel, and it conducts all types of business, administrative and otherwise. So calls come in all the time. I can't say that that every call that ever came in was funneled exactly the way it should have occurred with regard to Terra's case. I can't. But I do know that we had a lot of information going all over the place and not coming to us at all.
Okay. And the information that was coming in from all over the place and not coming to you at all, was that more from what I would call the civilian tip lines and message boards and that sort of thing? Or did that include local law enforcement as well?
Not sure I follow that question.
I think I asked if that was clear as mud. Let me try this one. What were the instructions the GBI gave local law enforcement, Asila PD, other areas around there, in order to make sure that the tips that came to them would make their way to the GBI?
With regard to Asila PD in Irwin County, we had the tip form and a format for them to transmit to us information that they got specifically about Terra. Asila Police Department and the Irwin County Sheriff's Department were they occupied the same building and they used the same dispatcher. So that was how we addressed that. With regard to the outside law enforcement agencies, we were just relying on them to provide us the information as it came in. We didn't have a format to do that. That's something that we learned in this case that you probably need to do.
Sure. Were the case agents instructed to ever contact or follow up with local law enforcement agencies just to make sure they were being diligent about giving tips, leads, and other information to GBI so that your office could then process and follow up?
Were agents directed to go to the local agencies and tell them how to?
No, just in inquiring and making sure, doing due diligence, if you would, reminding the agencies to make sure that they're sending the information.
Well, every county had a county agent, but I don't know that we have a formal structure for them to tell them that. I just, once again, there were some lessons learned from this case because of the way that it unfolded. That I teach classes about lessons we've learned, and that would be one of the biggest problems we have was getting control of the information. Period. I mean, from other law enforcement agencies and from the civilian tip lines, from the websites, everything. That was one of the problems we had was getting control of that information early on.
You would agree that the GBI had better control of the information it was collecting directly than it did from local law enforcement or from other non-law enforcement sources?
I would think so because we have autonomy over our people, but things don't always work out perfectly.
Fair enough, fair enough. You said that you had numerous people calling in leads and things, pursuing reward.
That's correct. That's my opinion. We had we had a publicized reward. Some of it, I'm not so sure if it actually ever existed. But
Yeah, I think witness may testify that was something about, on posters, maybe $150,000 or something like that.
I think the number that was most mentioned was 200,000.
And I think you said you also had people who were getting involved, at least in your opinion, perhaps for personal things.
I believe so, yes.
And it went so far that there were psychics involved in the case, trying to give information. Not the GBI.
Well, any publicized case, a publicized case has its number of psychics, but this one had a lot. We typically did not act on psychic information beyond determining what the information was and that it came from a psychic and discerning that it wasn't actionable.
Sure. In fact, there were occasions in 2007 where, well, for example, one, do you recall Mr. Kenya King passing along information in April 2007 that he knew who had killed Terra Grinstead and where the body and the murder went?
I would have to look at the report.
Well, do you recall at all there being any false confessions, people who had no type of case whatsoever saying, I did it?
Yes, that did happen.
I'm sure that complicated the investigations.
Well, you have to address it.
As you said, you have to address every lead and follow the information that comes in.
We try to address every lead. You have to prioritize them in with the resources that you're giving. So you try to address all of them. That's one of the things I stress, but sometimes things slip through.
How are leads prioritized?
You evaluate them. It's kind of a subjective process, but usually the case agent or someone in that capacity, if the leads are coming in, it's hard to describe a fluid investigation like this because we give our agents a lot of autonomy as they're out in the field and that they get develop something. It's not a corporate structure where they have to come back and get permission to go out to do another interview and then come back and get permission. They will run with that information as they obtain it and move on to an outcome to resolve something. Other times leads come in and they're disparate and we need to assign someone to address them and then they go out and follow up on it and then they have the same latitude to follow through with it then. It just depends on the circumstances as to how they're addressed.
Nick, you had said and acknowledged that you had received the Irwin County report from 2005 where there had been a report that Mr. Duke and Mr. Dukes had been involved in disappearance of Miss Grinstead.
What I'm familiar with is a reference in a longer report in the information that was obtained from the Terra Center and that this report had been authored by an Irwin County deputy and it was included in a longer report.
And the longer report that it was included in was a 9-page, y'all call it exhibits. That's kind of a report investigation where the agent makes a summary of their findings, discussions with people, and then, for example, the interviews recorded, that's then called an attachment to that exhibit.
If you want me to explain, would you like me to explain what an exhibit is?
Sure.
Okay. An exhibit is something that is prepared, when a case is prepared for court, it's organized so that that the items can be located, so things are given what they call an exhibit number, and that might be an investigative summary by an agent discussing what they did on an investigative act, and then it would include whatever attachments that might be associated with it, whether it be, as I said earlier, an evidence receipt, a waiver certificate, a transcript, or what have you, and all that together would be called an exhibit, and it would be given an exhibit number. in a working case file prior to court, we don't have exhibit numbers on items. They are just individual standalone investigative acts with the attachments included to the report.
In this case, that's something like 1,992 exhibits.
I haven't counted them, but I can check.
It's grown since your
Yeah,
time.
no, it was, much of that occurred while I was around.
Absolutely. The 2008 matter you referred to, that was an exhibit prepared by Agent Leah Lightner following her discussion with Janice Hall.
I'm not sure which order it is between Janice and Andy Paulk. They were both interviewed, one in July and one in October of 2008.
Have you reviewed those reports or summaries?
I have read those reports briefly recently and earlier, just when we were trying to determine why we missed this. And I'm pretty sure I probably read it back then, because I imagine my initials are on the report of having read it. So that's why I cannot say that I wasn't aware of this at some point.
And you familiar, well, and you agree, and I'll ask it this way, you agree that in Agent Lightner's report, it specifically states that Ms. Paulk felt law enforcement should look at Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes, given the statements he had made, or they had made earlier to Garlan Lott.
I'll have to read it, but I don't doubt that it said something to that effect.
Would it be beneficial? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Would it help to refresh your recollection to see that report?
Sure. Oh, it's,
Give me the scan.
no, I can see a highlight. Oh, I can't. You said you could scan, I could scan it, and I can't figure out how to do it. Yeah. Okay.
What's the exhibit number, Mr.
It
Moss?
is 1612.
Thank you.
She also felt that law enforcement should look at the Duke boys. She thinks their names are Ryan Duke and Bo Duke. Yeah. I've read that.
Okay, very good, very good. That information is contained on page 3 of the interview that occurred back on October 7th, 2008.
Yes, and I'm not sure if it's that one or the other interview where there's reference that it was addressed by Irwin County. I'm not sure.
Well, it technically did appear in both interviews.
Yeah, I believe those names appear in two GBI interviews.
And I believe you said that the GBI presumed it had been followed up on by Irwin County, but that the information actually had never been verified.
That's correct, and I'd rather not say the term presume. I just think we thought that.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be pejorative.
I might have said presume, but we thought that. And it's something we should have followed up, but we didn't.
Whose responsibility would it have been to follow up on that?
Mine.
Yours ultimately.
Mine.
Case agents never made any representation that they had followed up on that information.
That is something that I'm not sure I follow your question.
Well, I'm saying nobody ever represented to you that they had followed up on this information. You later discovered.
I don't think that an agent followed up or represented that they did. I think that we thought that it had been addressed by local law enforcement, and we should have followed up, and we did not, and that is my responsibility.
Thank you, Agent.
Anything further?
A couple follow-ups. Defense counsel asked you some questions about the crime scene. And did I understand you to use the word ambiguous?
Ambiguous. I apologize for my descriptive terms are not always understandable. have gone either way. We didn't have enough information to know whether a struggle occurred there or not. We did not have an obvious sign of a forcible entry, but we had the lamp, obviously, and some other issues, and the blood that could suggest that a struggle occurred, but then we had competing explanations that maybe that was already there, so we couldn't commit it. That's what I mean by ambiguous.
So I want to clarify the scene, what you saw there at Terra Grinstead's house on October 24th, 2005. Could that have been consistent with a struggle when she was being murdered?
Yes, it could.
Could it also have been consistent with about 10 teenage girls being in and out of that house on Saturday getting ready for a beauty pageant?
Yes, and people being in the house before law enforcement arrived trying to find her.
And on October 24th, 2005, did you have any specific knowledge about what had happened to Terra Grinstead?
No.
Do you work the case as if she has been murdered or if she has been kidnapped?
Yes, we have a kind of I guess it's a cliche, you hope for the best and presume the worst. And so we pursued it as if a criminal act had occurred.
Now, defense counsel asked you about what he termed false confessions, and I want to follow up a little bit about that. Have you ever, throughout the course of this trial, throughout the course of this case, did you ever have persons claim responsibility for the murder of Terra Grinstead?
Yes.
Okay. Did that happen once or more than once?
More than once.
Was there follow-up done on each of those occasions to the best of your knowledge?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
In each of those occasions where someone confessed to having killed Terra Grinstead, was there evidence to disprove their statements?
To where they confessed to having killed her, was there evidence to disprove? Yes.
Okay. Can you give us any examples of that?
Well, typically what we would do is interview the person, get their timeline, their alibi, and the main way that we disproved a lot of it, at least, let me rephrase that. We swabbed a lot of people for Buccal swabs to compare with the evidence on that glove. That did not necessarily exclude them from being a third party involved in it, but it did give us an indication that maybe what they were telling us was not true.
Okay. Were there any other ways that you were able to learn that the people who had confessed were in fact not telling the truth?
Well, oftentimes they would say that they were lying or joking or that they weren't serious when they made those statements.
Okay. What about what you referenced earlier as guilty knowledge?
Oh, I didn't explain the concept of guilty knowledge. I think I made reference to it. And guilty knowledge is information that only the offender would know. So that is information that law enforcement investigators often keep out of the public because they don't want it to become public knowledge, because they want to be able to evaluate on a defendant's or a potential offender's statements and measure it against evidence that we know is there that they don't know we know about. So consequently, it is a way, if someone's telling you that they did something in a residence and the layout of that residence has never been made public, and they're giving you a completely different description of the residence than what it actually is, that's an indicator that maybe they're not telling the truth. And that would be, say, guilty knowledge. Many times it's just the location itself.
In this particular case, what was the largest or the biggest piece of guilty knowledge that was held back that only law enforcement knew about?
Well, there was two, actually. One was the fact that we had Terra's DNA on the glove. We never disclosed that. We always said that we just had DNA on the glove, and when we did disclose anything about it, about 3 years in, we said that it was male DNA. We never disclosed that Terra's DNA was on the glove because we wanted if someone came to us and had a bogus explanation for that glove being there, we would be able to address that by asking them how Terra's DNA got on it.
Okay. What was the other piece of guilty knowledge that was held back?
The phone call from the payphone at 9:26 or whatever it was Sunday morning.
And from October 24th, 2005 until the day you retired from the GPI, had any person interviewed in this case were they ever able to give the GBI or any other agency information about that phone call from the payphone?
I'm not sure I followed that, please.
During the course of the investigation, up until the point you retired, any suspect or any person of interest ever have knowledge about that payphone call that was made in the early morning hours of October 23rd?
No. No.
No further questions.
Mr. Fox.
No response, Your Honor. Thank you.
What? You second?
Judge, can we approach briefly?
Okay. I don't know, my thing's going.